Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Nick, axslav, ranish, and today we're going to take a look at the strategies and tactics using them in Starcraft 2. Of course, it shows rules of engagement. Today we got 4 sections for you. The first 3 sections are going to be on gameplay. The first 2 are going to be PvPs between Sage and Oz. First on PvP engagements, then on maneuvering in Protoss versus Protoss. Then we're talking about Protoss versus Zerg and how to take a fast third and how to best use that build order in Protoss versus Zerg. After these 3 gameplay segments, it's going to be the viewer Q&A, so submit any questions you have to me at axslav on Twitter. Also, go to YouTube, youtube.com/official MLGSC2. Leave a comment with the question in it and any of the recent rule of engagement videos on that YouTube page, and I'll answer that at the end of the next episode. So first segment is going to be on PvP engagements between Sage and Oz. First, we're going to talk about PvP openings, then intelligent worker cutting, and then finding the best engagement and how to go about doing so. So we're going to start this replay off pretty early on, and we're going to start talk about the openings in PvP. So we're going to start off at the 3-minute mark. At this early in the game, both players, Sage at the top left, Oz at the bottom right, are doing very similar openings. Obviously, they're both getting double gas and they're getting the Psycore. Pretty much the standard of the standard in PvP. This is how you want to open, but now it starts to diverge, right? And there's a kind of a general group of very solid PvP openers, right? You can open Dark Templar. That's always good. You can open a Robo Expand opening. That's always good too. You can open a Phoenix opening. You can open a Gateway Pressure build. All these openings are very good. But one thing I actually want to rewind this back a second. Here we go. And point out that one thing that's really cool is if you're Sage in this example, right? When you're scouting your opponent, your very first scout goes in and sees that your opponent has 3 probes on each simulator, which he noticed actually as he ran in there. He's going to double check it again. If they're mining an insane amount of gas this early on, right? 3 on each before the Psycore is even done. What that means is that they're not going to do a pressure build. If you know your opponent is not going to do a pressure build, expanding is always a great idea, right? So that's why we can see from Sage's point of view as you fast forward here. He's, of course, going to get out the Stalker and check around for proxy pylons in his natural. Goes straight for that fast expansion. Now, after fast expansion, he's going to go into another gateway and a Roblox facility. It's going to be basically a Robo Expand build. But the important thing is that sometimes in Robo Expand, you want to get to 2 gateways and a Robo and then the Nexus if you think your opponent might be pressuring you. If you know your opponent isn't pressuring you because he's got the mining so much gas early, you can go ahead and get the Nexus first, and then get the gateways and the robotics, because you know in the first 6 to 7 minutes there's no threat. It's only about 7 minutes plus that they can really start throwing maybe an Oracle at you, maybe Dark Templar, maybe Blink Stalkers, whatever it is. It's not at least until the 7-minute mark they can really threaten you. So that's exactly how Sage opens, and he's going to get a slight advantage because he scouted his opponent and he reacted very well to get a very slight advantage in openings. Now, of course, the disadvantage is that Oz knows Sage expanded, so Oz can go ahead and expand behind us, and Oz can feel free to play as greedy as possible, whereas Sage is still a little bit in the dark. So while yes, he just spotted DT and killed it, he has to be a little bit worried about maybe some type of 4-gate DT play until he can confirm whether or not his opponent expanded as well. So it's going to end up fairly even. Sage with a slight advantage, as we can see here in Income tab. He's up by about 4 probes, but not the end of the world. Units lost, he's up a little bit there by, about 350 resources. But again, 350 resources, not the end of the world. Now he has information. Now both players know exactly what you're dealing with. And it's going to be a reasonably even game. Sage again with a slight advantage. Now, one thing that's really cool here, in fact, I think I actually skipped it. Let's go back just a bit here. One thing that Sage does is, as he scouted his opponent with this observer, he's going to see the expansion in just a second here. And what's important now is he knows, okay, my opponent's expanding. He opened DT, though, so my expansion was a little bit ahead of his. I'm a little bit ahead of him. If we pause it right now, what's one thing we'll notice? He's at 44 workers, but he's actually currently not building probes. And this isn't a macro mistake, but it's an intelligent worker cutting. And what it means is he says, okay, my opponent expanded, my expansion was slightly faster than his expansion. So what's important to recognize this is that if you're a little bit ahead in economy, right, how can you make that a bigger advantage, right? A couple probes ahead, it's going to be, you know, an extra 5 food in the battle. It's not going to be that big a deal. But what you can do is you can say, hold on a second. This small advantage right now, if I stop my workers temporarily, add a couple gateways, then take a third base, I have 2 things open to me. One, because I have a lot of gateways very early, I have the ability to produce a lot of units, or because I have 3 nexuses, I can go into probe production. And that'll give them the option of saying, okay, if my opponent takes a third base or tries to attack me, I can go ahead and just crank out gateway units like a maniac, defend the attack, or kill his third base using my slight advantage. If he just sits back on 2 bases for a long time, out of 3 nexuses, even if I temporarily cut probes for just a little bit, I can reproduce them very quickly. I'll have 3 mining bases available, and I'll be ahead in economy. So as we jump back in this game, we can see that's exactly what he does. He goes ahead and he cuts probes to get Templar Archives and 3 gateways, and of course he's getting blinks. So he can open himself up to potentially later on Charge at Archon, or just Blink Stalkers, Archons, Zealots and Archons, and a few Blink Stalkers, whatever he wants. And then he's checking to make sure there's no pylon by his third. Gonna go ahead and take the third base. And this is what's super important, is as he does this, the most important thing about this build is the Structures tab. He has 6 warp gates to his opponent's 4. And if you're in an immediate battle situation, warp gates are the most important structure because they allow you to reinforce directly into the battle. If you're thinking about how can I get the best army 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes from now, that's where you're going to get the Colossi, the Void Rays, you know, the power units. But in the short term, if you're thinking about I want to take a third base to deny my opponent's third base, you saw I just had that third about a second ago, that's where it's all about the gateway count. This gateway count is allowing him to take his third base, and he knows, okay, if my opponent moves out, I can warp in a whole ton of units. Meanwhile, he's going to move out, put a little bit of pressure on his opponent's third base, and ideally he's going to try to cancel the third base, right? If it's there. He's moving around, he's going to say, okay, my opponent's third base will cancel it. If he has a very good defensive setup, maybe I can't stop it. But he's going back to building probes and Stargates behind us as well. So he has a backup plan in case his opponent stays on 2 bases for a little bit longer. Sets the third base, sees nothing there, he's going to back away. Of course, if his opponent was defending with a lot of units, he could just recall it away. That's why it's so important. Anytime you move out as a Protoss, ideally you want to have that Mothership Core with your army. There's a few cases where it's better to keep it back, but in general, if you're not sure what to do, keep it with your army, because with your army, it's much better. Now we see he's transitioning to late game, adding Fleet Beacon, double Stargates. We're going to start getting a mass zero transition. Then he's going to notice something else. He's going to notice, okay, my opponent is still on 2 bases. My opponent doesn't have many tech units. That means he's going to have to move out with a very aggressive 2-base timing. Once he realizes this, he sees, okay, he's moving out to attack me. What does he do? This Fleet Beacon, check this out. It's going to be canceled, right? He's going to go ahead and cancel this. Why does he cancel it? To add him more gateways, because Fleet Beacon is great for the late game. His opponent not taking a third base, his opponent moving out to attack him. He needs immediate reinforcements during the battle. These 2 gateways, you see it's 19 seconds out of 65 Starcraft seconds, not real seconds. It is complete. That means in 45 more Starcraft seconds, plus 10 extra seconds to turn him into warp gates, he can warp in more reinforcements. Whereas the Fleet Beacon, it'll be several minutes before it can pay off. The gateways take 1 minute to pay off. So it's very important that he adds those gateways in to make sure he has the best chance of defending, because all he has to do is defend his attack and he'll be in great shape. Now, the one thing I want to talk about is from Oz's point of view, right? If we look at the Army Values tab, Oz is slightly behind. And that's just because the way the game's gone. He opened up with a slightly inferior opening. He's just a tiny bit behind in macro. He's slightly behind in Army Value. But it's very small, right? It's in fact 300 army value when you're talking about 7,000. It's a 5% difference. Micro and positioning is far more important. They're basically roughly even armies. Of course, he's down to workers, which is a good chunk of that food difference. But army values are very, very, very even at this stage. But he feels compelled to attack. Why does he feel compelled to attack? He's on 2 bases. His opponent is on 3. Income tab means over time he's going to be outproduced, right? Structures tab can tell you that right now, Sage already has even warp gates, and he has 2 Stargates producing, and he's adding 2 more warp gates. So over time, Oz will be outproduced by Sage. Right now, he feels compelled to have an engagement, compelled to fight. the most important thing about if you feel compelled to fight, if you have to attack, you have to pick the best engagement angle. So one thing is trying to come up this ramp. What's the engagement angle going to look at, right? As we can see here, as he tries to push up this ramp, if Sage micros this correctly, he's going to be fighting with an angle of units roughly this far apart in width, right? Which means if he has immortals, right, he could fit maybe like 4 mortals here. And if 4 mortals could attack at the same time, you know, maybe 5 or 6 stalkers, you know, 3 archons, something like that can all fit in that width. His opponent, though, if you take a look at what his opponent can actually field, at a range 6 away from this. And why am I saying range 6? I'm saying range 6 because immortals have range 6. Stalkers have range 6. The Colossus back here that has no range upgrade has range 6. Range 6 is a very important range in Protoss versus Protoss. So in this type of engagement, you're talking about range 6 away. How many units can his opponent field? His opponent can have an angle at range 6, basically about that big. And if you take a look at it, that's somewhere around 2 to 2.5 times the width of the attacker's angle. Which means that, you know, yes, army values are relatively even, but if we take a look at the unit count here, right? What do we have in the unit count? Each player has 5 or more immortals, right? Each player has 6 or more stalkers. In fact, it's 6 immortals, 6 stalkers. There's 5 immortals, 11 stalkers. All these units that are range 6 are so super important here that the concave is insanely important. So trying to attack up this ramp, yes, he has to attack. He's on 2 base versus 3. It's a very, very difficult proposition. It's going to be very difficult to make it up this ramp and have his full army engage at the same time. Now, what's the better idea? Well, let's take a look at the map. Let's jump back into this map here and take a look at different angles. Well, he could attack up this ramp. It'd be the same thing, right? His opponent could make a concave. It would be a little bit harder to make the concave. It wouldn't be quite as evenly formed, but it's still a bad ramp to attack up. The third option is via this route, right? And if you attack via this route, what's really cool? What's really cool about this route is if you have the Mothership Core in the zone basically between the 2 areas, your Mothership Core is like hanging out right around here, what you can do, you can put a time warp right here, right? This is your time warp. Your time warp's right there. Your opponent can't move through this zone very quickly. And so you as the attacker, can very quickly make a concave. You can break through this area and try to set up a concave, something like this, right? And if your opponent, ideally, they wouldn't let you get through this entryway, but time of dislocation, if they're already defending another ramp, can really slow them down. And if you're like this and they're trying to defend, they're all of a sudden stuck in an area defending that, coming through that choke, you have a great engagement. Now, if you can't get in this position, if you're stuck, if they have a concave like this and you're stuck back here, that's not good either. But the worst case, the very worst case, they do have this concave. You kill the rocks, you're still at maybe like a 30% smaller concave, not a concave you're at half the size. So even in the worst case, this is a much better angle to attack from, and ideally it can even be a favorable engagement. But back into the game, we see Oz tries to go up this ramp, and unfortunately when he tries to go up this ramp, you can see here, he's a time warp trying to get his opponent to be a little bit slower. But he sees here there's too great of a position, and he thinks, okay, maybe I can't go up there. And this is where ideally this Mothership Core would now go diagonally right to here. We'll hit the time warp right here. And this army could jump up and try to hold this position right here. Again, whereas the opponent has to go through that very small choke. Or you can just start denying the mining, maybe even work on a nexus. Very difficult to micro around buildings, but it is, of course, possible. But unfortunately, Oz decides, you know what? Let's try to go up this ramp yet again. What's very important is look at the units lost, right? Right now, Oz is down by 800 resources lost, right? He's 800 down just from the way the game's open so far. But as this battle takes place, we can see here, in fact, he was 600 down, but he just lost the Mothership Core. So he actually, opening the battle, he was 600 resources down. And now, all of a sudden, because he's in this position, look at this. These 2 Archons can't attack. This Immortal can't attack. This Immortal can only attack Archons. This Immortal can only attack Archons. The angle is very rough. He's got 7 Zealots, but how many Zealots are actually fighting? 1, 2, 3 Zealots are fighting. half his zealots are in the battle. It's just a very, very poor engagement because so many of the units are stuck here behind your rest of his forces, while every single one of Sage's units is in there in engagement. Even as he warps in zealots, look at the zealots. As they warp in, they head straight to the battle, not stopping for a second. And while they had even armies at the start of this battle, or relatively even armies, very, very close to being even armies, at the end of the battle, unit loss looks very bad for Oz, right? He opened up being 600 resources behind. Now he's 2,200 resources behind. So he's overall lost much, much more than his opponent. In a situation where his opponent is out-mining him, that's not affordable. And now he's down by enough food that we can see here, enough supply, excuse me. As he comes in here, he's just going to try one last attack. It's going to get held pretty convincing just by, you know... The concave was fine at last attack. There weren't enough units to have the concave matter, but he was just outmassed. He had no chance in that last battle. It was all because of that positioning for that engagement. So what decided this game is two things. One, Sage was a little bit ahead just on macroing a little bit more intelligently, right? He had a small lead from the opening with a faster expansion. He turned out small lead into a faster third base. Now, Oz could have taken a third base to counter that and try to play catch-up game, and it might have been very different. But Oz instead went for the two-base timing. And that can work. We saw they had even armies, in an even engagement, whoever micros better would win. Unfortunately, Oz took a poor engagement. So, always focus on those engagements. In PvP, it's so important about engagements. If you attack up a bad angle like a ramp like this, you will lose the game as the army size gets bigger. Always try to find, okay, maybe I'm a base behind, I have to attack my opponent, but there's almost always on every map some location where it's not a total suicide to attack. Try to find the best location possible. So wraps up this first segment on Sage vs. Oz. We'll take a short break and be right into another Sage vs. Oz game. In fact, our second game of their best of 3 series.